If you type the words "Will Donald Trump" into the Google search engine, the first suggestion it comes up with is win the presidential election, and the second is start World War III. The fact neither of those prospects now seems out with the bounds of possibility is both terrifying and proof of how much has changed since he announced his candidacy. Back then, the real estate tycoon seemed like a rank outsider, his braggadocio an in-joke that might play well on The Apprentice, but blatantly unsuited to the world stage where diplomacy is key. If after last week's pantomime of a Republican National Convention, he is still a joke, then he is a dark and potent one enjoyed at the expense of the dispossessed. There is little reassurance to be had from the U.S. establishment, which seems as panic-stricken as the late-night Googlers. So worried is the Washington Post, it took the unusual step of damning Trump on the day he accepted the Republican nomination. In a scathing editorial, it declared him uniquely unqualified to be president and a unique threat to American democracy. The tycoon's hate-mongering convention speech, in which he conjured up the image of a once great nation in need of reclaiming, sound familiar, anyone? Did nothing to discredit its stance. But is the Washington Post, or any newspaper, in a position to influence the result of an election taking place in the same post-fact, anti-expert climate of near hysteria as Brexit did? In an interview with talk show host Bill Maher last week, comedian Michael Moore said he believed Trump would win precisely because he represents a rejection of the mainstream thought, a rejection of the metropolitan elites perceived as having left the white working classes to rot. They see in this angry, blame-laying billionaire, a mirror image of themselves. When you say he hasn't read a book in his life, you've just described the majority of Americans. Get out of your bubble, everybody, said Moore. Moore's words are chilling because, here in the UK, we have seen how this goes. Many Remainers, trapped in their own Europhile bubbles, were blind to the scale of resentment in English cities and the capacity of Leave campaigners to exploit it. They couldn't conceive that a populist campaign based on lies and led by bigots would triumph. And yet it did. Boris Johnson, another parody of a human being, is uniquely unqualified to be Foreign Secretary. And yet, here we are. Viewed from the bubble, Trump's campaign to become the Republican candidate ought to have been a disaster. He stumbled from gaffe to gaffe, his rhetoric growing increasingly overblown, his claims less rooted in reality. But every time it seemed like he must have blown it, he tapped into a fresh reservoir of discontent, eliminated an opponent and consolidated his following. Americans, like us, are learning the hard way that, repeated often enough, the most outrageous comments become normalized, the worst calumnies, received wisdom. The same is true of the Republican convention itself. On paper, it was a study in ineptitude, a vivid illustration of why Trump is unfit to lead the country. There was Melania's speech, sections of which were lifted from Michelle Obama's, and the farcical attempts to explain this plagiarism away. There was Ted Cruz's refusal to endorse him and Al Baldessaro, Trump's advisor on veterans, suggesting Hillary Clinton should be shot for treason.